Today's talk is about Vedanta School of Philosophy.
Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all the viewers who have joined us from the various parts of our country and abroad for the Virasat Talk 188 under the Indian Knowledge Tradition Lecture Series. The event is conducted in the joint collaboration of the Department of Center for Philosophical Studies of Heritage Society and Heritage Society-Goa Circle. I would like to invite the keynote speaker for today, Madam Dimple Desai Khaitan. Madam Dimple is a young researcher and an academic enthusiast from Mumbai. She has studied IT engineering and has worked in the IT industry for 3 years. Following her passion for philosophical and Indian culture, she studied philosophy at postgraduate level at the University of Mumbai. Her fondness for teaching made her a formal teacher for 4 years, where she taught physics and theory of knowledge at some of the leading educational institutions and IB schools. She is the member of Center for Philosophical Studies at the Heritage Society. Dimple, with her determination and dedication towards learning and spreading knowledge for ancient Indian philosophy and cultural facets, has started a series of unique workshops for classes for children. In these workshops, she shares the stories from Ramayana and Puranas, creating awareness about Vedic gods and spreads knowledge for Indian festivals, rituals, and culture. She is contributing immensely to the dissemination of knowledge as well as sanskar among children and parents. Her academic and professional career, she has achieved several awards to mark her hard work and success. The topic for today is Vedanta philosophy. On behalf of the organizing committee of this program, I, Mayura Neelam Rajesh Thakankar, member of the Heritage Society Goa Circle, welcome you all for this enlightening session. Now, I am requesting our today's distinguished speaker to deliver her talk.
Thank you so much, Myra, for the wonderful introduction. I'd like to present my slides. Today's talk is about Vedanta School of Philosophy. Let me directly dive into it before wasting any more time. The topics that would be covered for today. So these are the topics that would be covered for today. First, I'll start with the schools of Indian philosophy. What are the various schools and where does Vedanta fall in all these various schools of Indian philosophy? And what are the texts and the scriptures that Vedanta philosophy is based on? And then we move ahead to the core teachings of Vedanta philosophy. It talks mainly about the individual self, universal self, and the connection between both of them. Then there is a concept called as Sagun and Nirgun Brahman, which is very interesting. And so I want to highlight it in this particular talk. And of course, we cannot miss out Advaita Vedanta, which is the one of the most important philosophies of Vedanta. And then later, the Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, which has kept the tradition alive for so many years. So these are the topics which would be covered in today's talk. Let's start with the first one, which is the Orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. Now, when I say schools of Indian philosophy, they literally mean there was a school of Indian philosophy where there were multiple acharyas who would teach their students, and there was a lot of discussion among them about that particular topic. So it was like a school where day in day out they used to discuss these topics. So it is a work of immense time and energy which has been spent in developing these schools of Indian philosophy. There is orthodox and there is unorthodox schools of Indian philosophy. When I say orthodox literally means those who believe in the Vedas. So the six schools of Indian philosophy are the ones which believe in Vedas, like Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Purva Mimamsa, and Vedanta. They believe in the authority of Vedas. Then there are 3-4 unorthodox schools of Indian philosophy, which are do have their origin in India, but they do not believe in the authority of Vedas. Like there is Buddhism, there is Charvak, there is Jainism. They have similar philosophies, but they do not entirely believe in the authority of Vedas. That's why we term them as unorthodox. Okay, coming back to orthodox schools of Indian philosophy. As you can see, Sankhya, Yoga, they go simultaneously. So yoga is the practical part, which we all know, and Sankhya is the theory of yoga. Similarly, Nyaya and Vaisheshik, they are theory. They both go hand in hand. Nyaya is a school of logic. and Vaisheshik is a school of atomic theory. Purva Mimamsa is again Purva Mimamsa and Vedant. They also go hand in hand, and they have their main scriptures from the Vedas and the Upanishads. Mimamsa goes a little bit on the ritualistic side, and Vedanta goes more on the knowledge side. Vedanta, again, there are many sub schools which have been developed in Vedanta, such as Advaita Vedanta, which is monism or non dualism. Then there is Dvaita, which is dualism. Then there's Vishishta Advaita, Shuddha Advaita, Dvaita Advaita. So basically, a lot of acharyas gave their commentaries on the Vedanta school of philosophy, which led to these sub schools. Like Shankara's commentary led to Advaita Vedanta. Similarly, Ramanuja Acharya's commentary led to Vishishta Advaita, and so on. So this is just the placement of where you find Vedanta in our Indian schools of philosophy. Now let's talk about where does Vedanta derives its teachings from. Vedanta school of philosophy is also called as Prasthanatraya. Prasthanatraya, that means it derives the teachings from three main sources. The first one is Upanishads. Now they say there are 108 Upanishads, and now there have been more Upanishads which have been discovered. But the principal Upanishads is what we're talking about over here. Principal Upanishads around 10 to 12, which are considered really important, which were written during the Vedic time. So Vedanta derives its teachings from those principal Upanishads. Then there is Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutras were written by Vyasji or the Badrayan Acharya, and they are very condensed, like very condensed form of verses, which is coded, and it's very difficult to understand them. So Brahma Sutras was basically written by Badrayan Acharya, and he tried to assimilate all the knowledge which was there in the Upanishads, and he tried to bring them together, and in a very condensed manner he has written the Brahma Sutra. So it's invaluable knowledge basically, but it's very difficult for people like us to understand it. So great acharyas like Shankaracharya, again Ramanujacharya, they have given their commentaries on Brahma Sutras. And of course Bhagavad Gita, which is the most important scripture of Hinduism. So basically Vedanta is based on, as you can see, on Upanishads, Brahma Sutras and Bhagavad Gita, and that is the reason it finds the core or the heart of Hinduism, because Bhagavad Gita is the most important text. Upanishads are the knowledge part of the Vedas, right? And Vedanta, if you look at this word itself, is Veda Anta. Anta means end. So the end of the Vedas, and end of the Vedas is where the cream of the Vedas lies, or the knowledge or the heart of the Vedas lies. So since it is taking its teachings from these three important sources, and that is the reason it forms the heart of Hinduism. You will see that all the traditions which are there today, Vaishnavism or people who believe in Shiva or who believe in Shakti traditions, they are some way or the other, directly or indirectly, related to the Vedanta philosophy. Unfortunately, people are not aware about this philosophy, but it is what forms the basis or the root of their religion. So we are going to discuss more in detail about what this philosophy is, because this philosophy is reflected in the rituals, in our day-to-day rituals that we perform. It is reflected in the mythological stories. We just need to decode it. But if you know the philosophy of Vedanta, it's much easier to understand the ritual. It's much easier to understand the mythological stories. All right. So I'm starting the philosophy with a story. And to understand that story, first we need to listen to this verse, which is given in Chandogya Upanishad. Chandogya Upanishad says there was a king called as Prajapati at that point of time. So it's very old, right? This Chandogya Upanishad is quite old. So we don't know exactly how Prajapati looked. But later on in the literature, Prajapati was linked to Lord Brahma. So Prajapati was a very famous king, and so at that point of time, the kings had a lot of knowledge, spiritual knowledge. So he declared that the self is the atma, that is free from evils. It is free from old age and death. It is free from sorrow, free from hunger and thirst. The self whose desires and intentions are real, that is the self that you should try to discover. That is the self that you should seek to perceive. When someone discovers that self and perceives it, he obtains all the worlds and all his desires are fulfilled. So said Prajapati. So this is given in Chandogya Upanishad. It's a story which follows after this. So Prajapati declared this on earth. And as soon as some king declares something like, if you get this, all your desires are fulfilled, and you will obtain everything that you want in the world. So it attracted a lot of attention. It attracted the attention of two prominent people, which were Indra, who is the king of Devas, and Virochin, which was the king of Asuras. So they decided, that since Prajapati has said something like this, that the self is indestructible, and if you know the self, you know everything, and you can get everything that you want in this world. So they were very curious. They wanted to know what this self is. They wanted to know more about it. So they both came to Prajapati, and they said, we want to learn more about this. So Prajapati said, if you want to know more about the self, then you have to live with me for 32 years, follow a discipline, and follow a routine in order to know that. So they both decided to stay with Prajapati for 32 years. They followed the discipline day in, day out. And then by the end of it, Prajapati called both of them and told them that the self is what you will see as a reflection in the water. So why don't you all go to a nearby pond or something and see your reflection in the water? And the reflection that you see is what is self. So Indra and Prajapati, they rushed to a nearby water body, and they saw their reflection, and they saw their eyes, they saw their ears and hands, and when they smiled, they saw that the reflection is smiling and everything. So they thought, okay, this is the self. So they came back and they told Prajapati, this is what we saw. So Virochan was very happy. Okay, so we have finally discovered what the self is. So Virochan thanked Indra, also thanked Prajapati, and then they left. So Virochan thought this is the knowledge of the self, and he went ahead and he shared it with all the asuras. Okay, this is what the self is, and I finally know what it is from Prajapati. But Indra, while he was going back to Devlok, he had this doubt. He was a very wise person, so he started thinking, okay, reflection is going to be different for every person, right? Even if whether is a king or is a common man, or whether somebody is a blind person, there is going to be a reflection of the blind person also. Somebody's handicapped, there's going to be a reflection of that. So reflection is changing, so it cannot be something which is indestructible or immortal. It doesn't go with the definition that he said earlier. So he comes back to Prajapati and he says, okay, I'm still confused about this self. So Prajapati asks him to stay longer with him to understand self more. So he stays for few more years with him. And then again, Prajapati calls him and tells him that the reflection you see is not the self, but what you experience when you're sleeping, that is the true self. When you're dreaming, that is your true self. So Indra is happy this time and he goes back again. So while he's on his way back again to Devlok, he starts thinking that dreams are different every single night. Sometimes the dreams are good and it makes me happy. Sometimes the dreams are not so good, and it changes my emotions while I'm sleeping. And every time I wake up, I'm in a different state of emotion because of the dreams. So this definitely cannot be the self. So he goes back again to the Prajapati and he says, I am still confused. Can you please share some more information about this? So Prajapati says that you have to stay for more years with me. So Indra agrees because he was really curious to know what this is. And so then after staying few more years in the same disciplined manner, Prajapati calls him and tells him that the self is the one which you see or experience in deep sleep. So deep sleep is when you don't get any dreams. That is the true self. So Indra is really happy this time. Okay, maybe this makes sense. So he goes back again to Devlok and he starts thinking that when I am in deep sleep, I don't experience anything. And there is no positive feeling. There's no happiness. There's nothing. I don't connect with anything, right? When you're in deep sleep. So that cannot be the self. There is just no object at all. There is no subject at all. And something seems to be still missing in this definition. So he goes back again to Prajapati. I still am a little confused. Can you please help me with this? So then Prajapati says, you have to obviously stay with me for a few more years to understand it better. And then at the end of that, he tells him, self is the one which is there in all these three states, in the external world that you're experiencing as a reflection in the water, in the dreaming world that you're experiencing, it is there also. In the deep sleep, also it is there. It is that self which is experiencing all these three stages, the external world, the internal world of the mind. It is that because of that self that you're experiencing all of this. That is the true self. So finally, Indra understands this knowledge, and then he goes ahead and talks about it to other devas um, in Devlok. So we'll talk about it more in detail about those four stages of consciousness. But it's a very interesting story, I thought. And, this also explains why the Devas are much more wiser as compared to the Asuras, because Virochan got satisfied at the first answer and he, shared it with his people. Whereas Indra, because he was curious and he wanted to know more, he got till the right knowledge and then he shared it with the Devas. So going ahead, next slide is the four stages of consciousness which Prajapati was talking about. So this is given in the Vedanta philosophy, which is a very good way of understanding the individual self or the Atma. So the first is the waking state, when you're awake, when you're experiencing everything in the outside world, right? You are a teacher, or you are working in a company, you are a mother or a father, you have your daily duty. That's your waking state, how you connect with the external world. So the consciousness is focused outwards. It's called as Vishwa. The second state is the dreaming state. Dreaming state is when you're sleeping and, the consciousness is inwards. The light is inwards. So the mind is making up things. There are imaginary objects. There are imaginary stories going on. So the consciousness is inwards. Okay. And that is called as Tejas. The third state is the deep sleep state, which is called as prajna, where the subject to object duality has been transcended. Because there is no object that you're experiencing, because there is no subject. So that subject object duality has been transcended in deep sleep. Right? You all must have experienced, even when you sleep and when you wake up refreshed, and you had no dreams, and that's why you slept really well, and you say, I slept well today. So you are still aware that you slept well, right, when you wake up. So that is that phase called as prajna, when you don't experience any external or internal objects. And it's very close to the state of consciousness, but it is not pure consciousness still. The fourth state, which is called as turiya, turiya literally means the fourth stage. So is where you actually experience a positive bliss. There is obviously no subject-object duality, and there is also a positive bliss in it. And it's basically, turiya is not something complicated. It just means that consciousness which is there through all the three stages, through the waking stage, through the dreaming stage, and through the deep sleep stage. There is something in you which is because of which you're experiencing the outer world, because of which you're experiencing the dream world, because of which you're experiencing the deep sleep, right? So that continuity, because of which you experience all of this, is what is called as the fourth stage of the turiya, or the pure consciousness. To understand this better, there is a very interesting analogy which is given in the Upanishads. So the concept of gold. For example, if you have a bangle of gold, you think that is gold and you're very attached to it. Okay, I have gold with me. And, someone takes that bangle and goes to the jeweler and converts it into a necklace. And you think that your gold is gone. Gold is not gone, right? It's just the form has changed. The form has changed into necklace. Or if you take a ring, if you convert it into a ring, the form has changed again. But the material which stays is the same, right? Gold, the material which is there in all three of them is gold. Similarly, this is compared to the four states of consciousness, which is the waking state, the dreaming state, and the deep sleep. These are three different stages, but the person experiencing all these three different stages is the same, right? So And if you think, you will leave all this jewelry and go outside and search for where is gold, then that's not possible, because that is where the gold is. And if you remove the gold from all this jewelry, then the jewelry will cease to exist. There cannot be any jewelry of any of these jewelry if the gold is not there. In the same way, you cannot experience these stages, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, if the consciousness is not there. So this is what analogy and the four states of consciousness which they use in order to explain the individual self. All right, I'll move to the next slide. See, as I told you, this concept of this Vedanta philosophy has been used in rituals, has been used in symbols, has been used in mythological stories. In the same way, the symbol of Om also signifies these four states of consciousness. So if you look at this carefully, you will see that the below this semicircle which is there of the Om, that represents the awakens, that the waking state, or the conscious state, the Vishwa. The upper half circle of the Om, that is the deep sleep state. And the third semicircle, which is there of the Om on the right-hand side, that is the dream state, Swapna state. So the three states of consciousness. And the Turiya is actually that dot which is there on the top. That is the pure consciousness. And that Chandrama that we have, that is Maya, or the layer of illusion, because of which we are not able to see the pure consciousness. So these are the three states, the waking, dreaming, deep sleep, around which our life is revolving, and we are not able to see the final stage because of Maya. So how beautifully this whole philosophy they represent in symbols and stories is just amazing. So I just wanted to share one of this. Going to the next slide. So next important concept of Vedanta is of Brahman. Now, Brahman, I have seen whenever I talk about Brahman to any of my friends or colleagues, they are usually confused about what is Brahman. So sometimes they confuse Brahman with Lord Brahma, right? How we have Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. So Brahma is the creator God. And Brahman is not Lord Brahma. It's a very different concept. So Brahman is the concept which was discussed in the Upanishads long before Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh came into picture. And then there is Brahmin. Brahmin is the Pandits, right? The Pujaris, which do all the rituals. That is not Brahman. So to simply put, what is Brahman is the idea of God. Very loosely, to put what is Brahman is the idea of God, what you call as this is the God that I worship, or this is the most important God, this is the highest God that you say. Or some people call it as, some people believe in energy, some people believe in a spirit, some people believe in nature. So whatever you think is the highest reality according to you is what is termed as Brahman. But the Brahman of Vedanta, they have come to this concept after a lot of philosophical discussions and arguments and debates. It's not just some vague idea. So let's understand, according to Vedanta, what this highest reality, which we call as God, is. So this particular verse that you see, Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. This is from Rig Veda. Imagine Rig Veda is the earliest known scripture that we have. And in there itself, they had said, Ekam Sad, that means there is only one truth. Sad means truth. Ekam Sad, Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. But the sages call it by different names. Different names, as in some call it as Vishnu, some call it as Shiva, some call it as Allah, some call it as Jesus, right? You call it by different names. The sages call it by different name, but the truth is one. And this is said in Rig Veda, the earliest known scripture. So we were aware of this fact long back. Okay, so so that Ekam Sat is what is Brahman. That one truth, the highest truth, is what is Brahman. And it is best described using a concept called as Neti Neti. So Neti Neti is the best possible description of Brahman. What is Neti Neti? Let's understand that. Neti Neti means not this nor that, neither this nor that. Because every time you try to describe that highest reality, you are going to make some or the other mistake. is what Vedanta says. Because we know that our senses are limited, right? We know that, we cannot even see the seven colors of the white light directly, right? That is the limitation of the eyes. We cannot hear ultrasounds. We cannot hear super ultrasounds, right? We have a limitation for our senses of ears, I mean, limitations with eyes, limitations. We cannot process things beyond the three-dimensional world that we live in. So there is limitation to what we think and what we experience as human beings. And people, the scholars of Vedanta philosophy, were very much humble to understand this fact and to accept it, that as a human, you have certain limitations. And the highest reality, which has created this whole universe, is not something which we can directly perceive or understand, even logically. So that's the reason they use this concept called as neti neti to describe it, because every time you try to describe it, that God is in the shape of nature, or God is in the shape of Vishnu, or God is in the shape of a human, you are only giving it meaning according to the thoughts that you have. In reality, nobody knows how it is. Nobody has seen it. So neti neti is the correct description. It is neither a male, it's neither a female, it's neither a human, nor is it an animal. It's neither hot, it's neither cold, it's neither big, it's neither small, it's neither this color or that color. It's neither, every time we try to describe it using a quality that we use in our daily life, you're going to make a mistake. Because this is a very abstract concept and it's something which is beyond our understanding. And that is the reason the Vedantic scholars were humble enough to accept this, that the best way to understand Brahman is by neti neti, or by being silent. It's something to be experienced intuitively rather than coming to conclusions. So you either do neti neti as to what it is not, or you just be silent, meditate upon it, and experience it. So these are the two ways to describe Brahman. And so to understand it further, the concept of Brahman, there is this verse which is given in Kena Upanishad. It says, Brahman cannot be expressed by speech, but it is that by which we are able to speak, right? Brahman cannot be thought by the mind, but it is that by which the mind thinks. Brahman cannot be seen by the eyes, but it is that by which the eyes can see. Brahman cannot be heard by the ears, but it is that by which the ears hear. That alone know as Brahman, not what people worship here. Right? So we worship all sorts of divine beings, right? We have all sorts of forms and shapes and everything that we believe in. But the true highest reality is that something which we cannot describe with our speech, not something which we can see through our eyes, not something which we can process through our mind, but it is because of which we are able to speak. We have that reflection of that Brahman in ourselves, and because of that which we are able to speak, because of which we are able to see, because of which we are able to hear. But you cannot turn inwards and see what it is, right? It's not something which is comprehensible. So it's a beautiful verse which is given in Kena Upanishad, which I wanted to share. And it's one of my favorite verses describing Brahman. Next slide is, okay, so I have one more story which explains the concept of Brahman. It's a very short story and a very straightforward story, which will make it very clear. So this is the story of Shvetaketu and Uddalaka. It's given in Chandogya Upanishad. So Shvetaketu was Uddalaka's son. So Uddalaka had sent him to Gurukul to study for a few years, for 12 years, and then come back. And when he came back, Uddalaka started asking him questions. Do you know this self, the universal self, that once you know it, you will know everything else? Do you know about it? So Shvetaketu was like, no, I'm not aware of anything like that. I was not taught anything like that. So Uddalaka starts explaining him what it is. And Shvetaketu is very curious. He keeps asking more and more questions. So Uddalaka tries to explain the concept of Brahman using a story. Not a story, but he tries to explain him using the concept of salt and water. So he tells him, you get some salt, 1 teaspoon salt, you mix it in a glass of water, and meet me in the morning next day. So he does the same thing. And then in the morning, when he meets him next morning, Swetaketu tells him, go bring me the salt that you put in the water. So Swetaketu says, how can I get the salt? It's mixed in the water. I cannot get it back. So Uddalaka says, okay, no problem. What do? Is you taste the first half of the water and tell me how does it taste. So he sips it and he says it's salty. Like, okay, now remove the first half of the glass and from the middle you taste it and you tell me how is it. So he removes the first half of the glass of water and I taste it from the middle. That's also salty. The bottom of the water, that's also salty. So that's what then Uddalaka tells him. This is the nature of Brahman. It is so much mixed in the water that you cannot differentiate it from the water, that you cannot differentiate the salt from the water. It is everywhere. So when I say everywhere, in Vedanta, it literally means everything that is present in the universe, whether it is your existence, the humans or the animals or the nature, or whether it is the elements, the sky, air, space, all of that. All of that is Brahman and you cannot differentiate it. It's everywhere. Whether you look at the trees and you think, acha, Brahman is here, or whether you look at the humans, okay, Brahman is here, or whether you look at the objects, earth, and you say, okay, Brahman is here. It is everywhere. That is what it's trying to say, this particular story. You cannot differentiate Brahman from the things of this universe, from this entire universe. So, Vaishnavism has a very beautiful way of saying it. This whole universe is the body of the God, they say that all the planets are his hands and legs, and the sky is his breath, and things like that. So it describes the whole universe that we know as the God's body, because it's everywhere. That is the whole concept. It's very similar to the concept of pantheism, which is there in Western philosophy. But still, there is much more to it when it comes to Brahman. Because it has been argued, so I'm just teaching the concept, but this concept of Brahman has been debated a lot to come to this conclusion. And we'll talk about it once I come to the Advaita Vedanta section. Okay, now talking about the relationship between Atman and Brahman. So Atman is the individual self and Brahman is the universal self. So, there are a lot of questions in the Upanishads discussing how they both are related or how they both are different. So to understand that, so we had that jug of water. Suppose you can see in the picture, there's a jug of water where you put a spoon of salt and the salt is mixed in it, right? You cannot differentiate the salt. Now, the same jug of water, that salty water, if you take and put it in the cups which are given below, you can see all the cups are of different shapes. You just put it in all the cups and you will see that the shape of the water will change, right, in each cup, because the shape of the cup is different. But is the taste of the water going to change? No, right? Because it's the same salty water, irrespective of which vessel you put it into. The taste of the water is not going to change. The same with Brahman and Atman. So if you imagine that as the Brahman, the jug of water, and these are the different individual souls, right? The same salt water is being poured into different things. That is how it is. So this is one of the simplest analogies I could give to explain the concept of Brahman and Atman and how they are related. So it's the same universal self which is reflected in everything, not just in humans. Okay, so over here, since we're talking about Atman, but Atman and Brahman, this is how they are both are related. There is not much difference. But if we look at the different schools of Vedanta, there are some differences at this point of topic. But I have this verse which is there in Chandogya Upanishads. It's called Tattvam Asi. Tattvam Asi means that you are. That is Brahman, or the highest reality. You is your individual self. That you are. So it's this one and the same thing. Or we have Aham Brahmasmi, or I am Brahman. The Mahamantras which are given in the Vedas. And I will say the same philosophy has been propagated. And not just propagated. So in Upanishads, when they said that Tattvam Asi, it was not at that point of time reasoned out. It was something that they were enlightened with, something that they understood intuitively in their meditation, these kinds of verses. So they wrote it down in the Upanishads, but in the Vedanta, when we say a school of philosophy, there have been a lot of logical discussions going on each and every verse given in the Upanishads. And they have been interpreted in certain way because of the logical discussions that have followed. That's why I say a school of philosophy is different from the actual text. So there's a lot of confusion between, I have seen, between Upanishads and the Vedanta. They are not one and the same thing, although Vedanta derives its teachings from the Upanishads. So, according to Advaita, yes, Atman and Brahman, there's absolutely no difference between them. Tattvamasi, that you are. But then there are other schools, such as the Dvaita, which distinguishes between them, that we'll come to know in the later stages. Um, Okay, this is also one concept which I really wanted to share about Vedanta, which is Sagun Brahman and Nirgun Brahman. Now you know what is the concept of Brahman. Um, so there are two types of Brahman which are discussed in Vedanta. Sagun Brahman is also called as Apara Brahman or the lower Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is the Para Brahman or the upper Brahman. Nirgun means devoid of any qualities. Sagun means full of good qualities, right? So Sagun Brahman is what is we call as Ishwara, whatever you consider as the highest reality. For example, if Vishnu, Lord Vishnu, is your Ishwar, then that is a Sagun Brahman. Nirgun Brahman is the absolute Vedantic or Advaitic, like the Brahman which is described in Advaita as the Brahman, which you cannot describe using any quality. It is Nirguna, it does not have any qualities. So, Sagun Brahman is the personal aspect of the absolute. So, why you need to understand Sagun Brahman and Nirgun Brahman is that there is still a space. Although we have described Brahman as the absolute, we have described it using neti neti. Like you cannot it's neither this, it is nor that. It doesn't have a shape or a form, or it's beyond our intellectual comprehension. But still, we have given a space for something called as Sagun Brahman. Sagun Brahman is the lower state of the actual Brahman. So Sagun Brahman is because, and why we did this is very important, is because although the Vedantic scholars knew the highest reality cannot be described by us, it is neti neti, but it still was aware that we have some emotional needs and that as humans, we need a picture in front of us to believe in something. It's just to say that something is neti neti and living your life about it is not something which is very easy, which everybody can do. I'm not saying that nobody can do it, but not possible with most of the generation, most of the people. You need an image in front of you saying this is God, and you need a system like that. And that is the reason they accepted something called as Sagun Brahman, but they were completely aware of the fact that this is not the highest reality, it is the lower Brahman. We are calling it as the Sagun Brahman, we are giving it a form, we are giving it a name, calling it as Vishnu, and we are giving it all the best possible good qualities that a human can have, so that it becomes the highest goal of a common man, of how great the God is. And we call it as the knower of all, the inner controller of the entire world. And that it's easier for humans to perceive that way. It's easier to imagine that the highest reality is Lord Vishnu with the highest good qualities. He's the protector, he's the maintainer, he's the creator. It becomes easier to conceptualize, it becomes easier to understand this concept. Because the higher Brahman or the upper Brahman, which is the Nirgun, which does not have any quality, is not something which is easily understandable by the common man. Or even if it is understandable, it's the concept of faith and the concept of having a name in front of you, or a name in a form in front of you, the effect that it has, the emotional effect, or the understanding that it develops, is something else. So, and that they recognize the need of humans, and that is the reason they brought this concept of Sagun Brahman and Nirgun Brahman. So, this is what it is. Sagun Brahman is what we call as Ishwar. Nirgun Brahman is the absolute. Ishwar or the Sagun Brahman is the personal aspect of the absolute. It's something which we personally look at Brahman as. It can be anything. It can be a book. It can be any god that you believe in as the highest reality. That is your Sagun Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is the absolute, which is not describable. It is indestructible or not describable. And the best way is Neti Neti. Okay, I'll go to the next slide. Now, the various schools of Vedanta. Vedanta, as I said, it derives its teachings from Upanishads, Brahma Sutras, and Bhagavad Gita. So, Brahma Sutra being the most difficult of them all because it is very condensed, it is kind of coded, you need to decode it. So the great acharyas like the Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Vallabhacharya, they gave their commentaries on Brahma Sutras, they gave their commentaries on Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. And based on that, different schools were developed. So Shankara's school was called as Advaita Vedanta. Ramanujacharya's school was called as Vishishta Advaita. Madhvacharya's school was called as Dvaita Vedanta. Because there were certain differences in understanding the concept. Although there are a lot of similarities in these schools of Vedanta, like the concept of Atman or the concept of Brahman or the concept of Maya, of Sagun Brahman, Nirgun Brahman. These concepts have been universally accepted in these schools of Vedanta. But they differ in certain aspects, such as Advaita Vedanta, which we are going to discuss next, is Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dualism. It literally means non-dualism. Dvaita means dualism. Advaita means non-dualism. Non-dualism means everything is one. There is no duality. Atman is same as Brahman, and this Maya and everything is just a reflection of God. So this particular verse from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad describes the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta completely. It's called as Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmeva Apna Paraha. Brahma Satyam means Brahman is the truth, is the highest reality, is the only truth. Jagat Mithya. So the world that we live in is unreal, is illusionary, is just a concept of the mind. Jivo Brahmevaha Naparha, that means the Atma which is there inside, or the Jiva which is inside, is not different from the Brahman. It's one and the same thing. Rest everything that you imagine your life to be is an illusion. Your happiness, your problems, your struggles, your money, your family, and everything that you have built up around is an illusion. The only truth and the highest truth is the Brahman. And the Atman which is sitting inside is nothing different than the Brahman. And so it's non-dual. It's monism. Everything is one. Advaita Vedanta is very famous even in the West, and I think even in India it's very famous. There's a reason why it's so famous, because Adi Shankaracharya's arguments very difficult to beat, and he has been unbeatable, and that's the reason even Swami Vivekananda and Raman Maharshi, they have spread this philosophy a lot, and that's the reason Advaita Vedanta has become so famous. It's one of the schools of Vedanta. As I showed you earlier, there are many schools of Vedanta. These 5 are the prominent ones. Advaita Vedanta is just one school of Vedanta which has become very popular. There are many other schools, like there is Bhakti tradition Vedanta. All the other schools that you see, the major schools, such as the Vishishta Advaita and the Vallabha's Advaita, Dvaita Advaita. They are all Vaishnava schools. They are actually, you can give them the credit of bringing the Bhakti tradition back into India, because Shankaracharya was adamant and with his arguments about Brahman and that Jagat is Mithya. So this was a little uncomfortable for the others, and they tried their best to combine absolutism with personal theism. Personal theism. Like, I believe in this God, but I agree, I accept. Okay, Brahman is neti neti, but I still want my God is still very close to me, and I want to relate to it somehow. And so they try to combine personal theism with absolutism in a very beautiful manner. And that's how the bhakti tradition has been kept alive in India for so many years. So Vedanta philosophy, when these two combine, take three main lines. It takes Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism. Um, the major schools that we have of Vedanta are of Vaishnavism, but there have been scriptures and text and traditions which have been in Shaivism and Shaktism, which are related to Vedanta philosophy. But in today's talk, I'm only going to focus on Vaishnav schools. Like Vallabhacharya started Shuddha Advaita. Shuddha Advaita means pure, Shuddha means pure non-dualism. Ramanujacharya started Vishisht Advaita. Vishisht means qualified non-dualism. Madhvacharya is a complete contrast of Advaita, which says Dvaita. Dvaita means dualism. Everything is two, it's not one. So it's a complete opposite of Advaita. But even his philosophy is amazing. So it's what is amazing is from the same text there have been completely contrary interpretations. And we have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Achinta Bheda Bhed, you know. So even Swami Narayan's Vaishnavism school of tradition also comes from Vedanta. And so if you're a Vaishnav, or whether you believe in Lord Shiva or Shakti, somehow you will see that your tradition is linked to Vedanta somehow. The roots are still connected because it was the most unbeatable philosophy at that point of time, and all of this has been developed over that philosophy. Okay, so all these Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, um, I'll just share what is similar between these schools of philosophy. They're slightly different from Advaita Vedanta. So I have slightly different as in because they believe more in the Sagun Brahman, and they term the Sagun Brahman as Lord Vishnu, or an avatar of Lord Vishnu, that is Krishna. So that's why they fall under the category of Vaishnava schools of Vedanta. There are certain subtle differences between all these schools. Like Ramanujacharya says, it's qualified, so it has certain qualities. Vallabhacharya, there's similar minor differences which I don't want to get into because it's important to remember the larger picture. So all the Vaishnava schools, what they propagate is a harmonious combination of absolutism and personal theism, right? So Vedanta mein jo absolutism hai in Advaita Vedanta, they do believe in Nirgun Brahman and that everything is one, and the personal theism factor. And they do believe that liberation is attained only through selfless devotion towards God, or through Pushti Marg, or God's grace. Whereas in Advaita Vedanta, liberation is attained by contemplation on the knowledge, right? So here they have, because it's Bhakti tradition, we all know meditating is not easy, right? So this particular path is much more easily doable by the common man, and hence the Bhakti tradition. So all these Vaishnava schools believe that liberation is attained through devotion to God. So this is also one path which is much easier compared to the earlier one. Brahman is identified as Vishnu or Krishna, and the God is the immanent ruler of the world. He rules the world from within and is still indifferent, is still different from the whole world, is not affected. And souls, all the souls that are there in the world, the matter which is there in the world, they depend upon God, but the God is not dependent on them. And Brahman really manifests himself as this universe without undergoing any change. So Brahman manifests itself. Really, I'm focusing on this is because there's a concept of Brahman Vivartavad and Parinamvad. So when we talk about Shankaracharya's Vedanta, they believe in the concept of Vivartavad, is where Brahman does not really transfer into this world. It's an illusion. Whereas the Vaishnava schools believe that Brahman really manifests himself in this world. So Parinamvada. Maya is his power through which he is manifesting himself as many. Everything looks, every object looks different, every person looks different because of his creative power of Maya. Although everything is one, but we are not able to distinguish it because of Maya. So Maya is this creative power. It's not an illusion. So that's all. I'll just quickly revise what I did so far. So we started with the different schools of Vedanta, the orthodox schools, the unorthodox schools. Orthodox are the ones which believe in the Vedas, unorthodox do not believe in the Vedas. And out of the six orthodox schools, like Yoga, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaishashik, Vedanta is one of the six orthodox schools and one of the most famous orthodox schools. It has a living tradition for so many years, thousands of years. All the Vaishnava schools do belong and get their core philosophy from there. And then we discussed the core teachings of Vedanta as to what is the individual self or the atman, um, using the four states of consciousness: the waking, the dreaming, the deep sleep, and Turiya. And then we discussed what is Brahman. Brahman is I think the easiest example to understand is how we mix salt and water and we're not able to differentiate it. And that's how Brahman is throughout the world. We're not able to differentiate it from the object and the God because it is literally in every particle of this universe. And we saw the relationship between Atman and Brahman, how we pour the salt water in different vessels and it takes different shapes, but ultimately it is the same salt water which is there in every person. It's the same reflection of the Brahman, Tattvamasi, right? And then we saw the different schools, what is Advaita Vedanta and what are the different Vaishnava schools which have come from the Vedantic philosophy. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mayura.
Thank you, ma'am, for this informative talk. It was very insightful for me, and I believe for all our viewers as well who have joined us today. Um, a question that I like to ask you. So you come from science background, you've done your IT engineering, and yet you delve into spiritual talks as well. So we, India, is known to be the land of spirituality. Yet we are progressing in the field of science in the 21st century as well. My question to you is we consider spirituality to be a hoax unless it is converged with science. So, what would you like to say about this, the intertwining of these two topics when they are actually considered to be diverging?
Okay, that's a great question. Actually, the common people that perceive these scriptures or spirituality to be a hoax are actually the ones who have not read the scriptures very carefully, or also the ones who have not gone into science more carefully. Because me, as I was in my science background, when I was a physics teacher, I started reading a lot about quantum physics, and you would see that the leading scientist in that field of quantum physics, like we had Heisenberg, we had Tesla, we had Albert Einstein. They all have been influenced. Robert Oppenheimer, who made the atom, and they all have been influenced by the Upanishads. They have been influenced by Bhagavad Gita, and you will often see them quoting from the Gita or from the Upanishads in their talks, in their interviews. And this just shows that the leading scientists, if they do believe in our scriptures, then who are we? So the common people who think that the scriptures or spirituality is a hoax, they really need to study it more in depth, because if the leading scientists are saying this, then definitely there is something which is worthwhile in it. And not just that, when I discovered that in Hanuman Chalisa, which was written in the 15th century, they have Tulsidas ji has given the distance between sun and earth, and that was like 1,000 years before we actually even made telescopes and a lot of things, right? So we have Aryabhatta, who has given us the value of pi till 4 decimals. before the actual Western world came to it, or it has they have he has explained lunar eclipse, he has explained solar eclipse long before the Western world came to terms with it properly. So all this kind of knowledge, if you if it was accessible to those people without the scientific equipments, that really shows that they have access to the correct knowledge. And that's the reason, I started believing in all this much more. There is also Acharya Shushruta, who is called as a father of surgery, who has given 300 surgical procedures. Um, and even plastic surgery was something which was discussed by him long back. So it's just we are not aware about our culture, we are not aware how much discoveries and how much knowledge is there in the scriptures. And when you talk about spirituality, so the spirituality terms that we have come to, when we say Vedanta or the mythological stories we have, it's because we have not read the philosophy behind the mythology, that we don't believe in it. When I did my master's in philosophy, I realized that every sentence in the Vedanta or Vedas has been discussed thoroughly for hours and hours by great acharyas for years. A lot of sages together have been discussed, and there have been proper logical discussions, one after the other, argument, counter argument, and that's how they've come to a conclusion. It's not just blind faith that we believe in something. And I think if you read more, I think people will become more aware of this. That's all.
Thank you, ma'am. Um, Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your efforts to address my question. You answered really well, and I would like to extend my immense gratitude to everyone present here. I, Mayura Nilam Rajesh Takankar, on behalf of the Heritage Society and its large family, show my gratitude to our profound speaker, Madam Dimple Khaitan Desai. I thank you sincerely for accepting our invitation and present a talk on our platform. I also thank our Director General, Professor Anant Ashutosh Trivedi sir, for all the members of the Heritage Society for actively organizing today's talk and giving us the opportunity to present this very important topic today. Thank you to all the participants watching from different parts of the world. Thank you.